Thank you. Cookie, may we have a roll call, please?
Commissioner Narita?
Here.
Commissioner Reyes?
Here.
Commissioner Rowinski?
Here.
Chair Lorraine?
Here.
And I think I saw Commissioner Robbins. I don't see him.
I do see him under panelists.
Yeah. Oh, he has his video off. And Commissioner Robbins?
Looks like you're muted, Commissioner Robbins. Maybe we can try to send him a note. But we can proceed.
But he is here. Thank you.
There we go. Excellent. There he is. Good evening. Due to the physical distancing protocols in place at this time, we continue to encourage public participation remotely. Information on how to provide public comment is explained at the bottom of our published agenda. There are 2 ways to participate. You can join the Zoom meeting by clicking the link at the top of the agenda and then use the raise your hand button to be called on at the appropriate time for public comments. And you can join by phone by calling 408-638-0968. The conference ID number is 894-1140-5984. The password is pound or hash 960651. If you join by phone, you can press *9 to raise your hand to be called on for public comments. And when you're called on, you can press *6 to unmute yourself. Then you state your name and provide comments. These options for public comment will remain available until I close public comments for a specific item. We have 1 item on our agenda today beyond the consent calendar. There's also a general public comment for items not on the agenda, and that will happen before we get to our item. And with that, I would like to move to our consent item number 1, which is Commission regular meeting minutes approval. I'd like to hear any questions or concerns of the minutes from any commissioners. I see Vice Chair Narita and Commissioner Rowinski. Let's start with Vice Chair Narita, please.
Hi, thank you so much. I just wanted to offer an amendment on the minutes for commissioner feedback because I noticed that some of the my 2 main points that I had in the comments were not reflected in that feedback section, and that was 1, a recommendation to examine incentive programs and around bike supply. I noted that twice in my comments, but that was not reflected. And then 2, a recommendation for continued commitment to the North Central community in being in constant communication and relationship building to repair trust and to continue to monitor the parking situation as things unfold. Thank you.
Okay, let's move on to Commissioner Rowinski for any comments she has.
Yes, a comment that I had mentioned that it's not reflected in the minutes, and it's a little build off of what Commissioner Narita said. Is during the meeting, I had suggested and highly recommend that when we do our quarterly bike PED updates, that when we do get to the North Central bike plan, that includes the bike plan updates as well as the parking mitigation planning and particularly implementation. That is also discussed during our quarterly update. And in doing so, this will give an opportunity, particularly for the North Central residents, to provide us feedback as well as staff in terms of, particularly from their point of view, how the parking mitigation planning and implementation efforts are going. So I would like to have that reflected into the meeting, please. meeting minutes.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Lewinsky. Cookie, how do you think that can be added to the minutes?
It will be reflected as an amended to the minutes in the when it's uploaded.
Excellent. Thank you. Any other comments about the minutes?
I move approval of the minutes as amended.
I second.
Cookie, may we have a roll call vote, please?
Commissioner Narita?
Aye.
Commissioner Reyes?
Aye.
Commissioner Rowinski?
Aye.
Chair Lorraine?
Yes.
And Commissioner Robbins?
Aye.
The motion passes 5-0.
Thank you very much. Now I'd like to move on to the new business item we have, which is stormwater funding. Oh, I'm sorry. Public comment would go first. So this is the general public comment for items not on the agenda. If you have a public comment for an item not on the agenda that you wish to give at this time, please raise your hand by hitting the button if you're in the Zoom meeting, or hitting *9 if you're on the phone. You may have up to 3 minutes. Please raise your hand at this time. And going once, twice. Very good. In that case, I will close the general public comment and move on to our new item, new business, stormwater funding survey findings. And I believe we have a presentation from Sarah Scheidt. Good evening.
Good evening, commissioners and Chair Lorraine. My name is Sarah Scheidt. I am the Regulatory Compliance Manager for the Public Works Department. And I'm going to be presenting along with Jerry Bradshaw from SCI Consulting Group on our stormwater funding survey results. Next slide. So the presentation agenda for the day, I'm going to just go ahead and give a little bit of a project background and history, and remind you all a little bit about the stormwater funding analysis that we did. And then Jerry will get into the stormwater survey results, and we'll talk about the next steps in our process. So we first came to you back in December of 2020. We provided an overview of all of the different stormwater system activities, focusing on the unfunded ones. We have the operation and maintenance of Marina Lagoon and all of the other creeks that drain to the lagoon or to the bay. We have capital improvement master planning, infrastructure, and green infrastructure construction. We have operations and maintenance of our conveyance system, trash reduction mandates, and regulatory compliance with the municipal regional stormwater permit, and Marina Lagoon dredging. We went over all of this with you initially back in December of 2020. Then in February of 2021, we brought the funding analysis, which goes over the evaluation of our projected financial needs, which Jerry will get into a little bit more in a few slides. Basically, for all of the services and activities that I just mentioned, it's going to cost around $8.4 million a year, which is what we're trying to find funding for. The funding analysis also did an evaluation of potential funding sources, in particular a parcel fee or a benefit assessment, and we'll be getting into those. And the funding analysis also went over the preliminary rate structure and recommendations. The recommended rate was on the average residential parcel around $16 per month to cover all of the unfunded stormwater activities. We took these to council in May of 2021 with a recommendation that we move forward with a community survey and the fee study, along with significant community engagement, until we potentially go to a ballot measure. So where we are today is bringing you the results of the stormwater survey, getting your feedback on our recommended approach, and taking that recommendations to the City Council on the 21st, March 21st. The implementation steps that we are recommending after this would be to continue with the community outreach, continue with the fee study, depending on which rate we decide to move forward with, and then move on to the ballot process. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jerry Bradshaw with SCI Consulting, and he will talk about the community survey. Jerry, you're muted.
There, sorry about that. I thought I had it wired this time. Well, thanks, Sarah, for introducing this. The community survey is an important part of the whole process that Sarah laid out for you. It really is a way for, once we've learned what the city thinks it needs, is to go out and see what the community thinks is needed for these systems. And as we came out of the financial analysis last year and started to craft the survey in the summer, we made the decision to really take two separate approaches. So we had to increase the number of surveys we did by a small amount, but we ended up doing two completely different surveys, one for stormwater overall citywide, which is basically the entire 8.4 million that Sarah talked about from the financial analysis. And then we also wanted to test a lagoon-centric type of funding mechanism. And in that case, we selected a little different kind called a benefit assessment, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So we ended up sending out two completely separate surveys to different sampling of the community. What we were hoping to learn from these is really, number one, what are the priorities of the community? We want to make sure that they line up with what City Hall is thinking they need. And to a lot of extent, we learned a lot about that. We also want to test some of the messaging that we would use in any kind of ballot measure in the future. And then finally, we wanted to test the willingness to pay or willingness to invest in this system. We have a couple of options that we tested in the survey, as I mentioned, and we wanted to use this tool to narrow those options to see which is the best path forward, and hopefully just focus on that one path. We did propose a lot of projects and issues, and we asked people to give us responses to those, and we'll show you the different support levels for those different projects and issues. So what we did is we mailed the survey out on November 5th. We wanted to get it out in people's hands before we got into the holiday season in earnest, and we think we accomplished that, which is evident by our return rate of about 15%. That's a very normal return rate for a mailed survey like this. We plan on that, and we estimate our margin of error based on a return rate, and we were happily greeted with a nice solid return rate of 15%. The margin of error is less than 4%, which is always good news for us. When you look at national polls, oftentimes those are up in the 5% margin of error rate. So that's just an introduction to what the survey was shaped like. Before I go into some of the more details, I wanted to mention that the two funding mechanisms that came out of the financial analysis that we presented to you a year ago were, for the stormwater, was to use a stormwater fee or a property-related fee mechanism. And Proposition 218 has some strict requirements on how those can be adopted. And for stormwater, they require that become a ballot measure. But the quirky thing about that is that the ballot measure isn't through registered voters like you have in your November election. This is a balloting of property owners. So because we're trying to model what an election or a ballot measure might come to, we targeted property owners in the survey in the same manner. So we wanted to have the survey mimic what a future ballot measure would look like. For the lagoon-centric, it was a benefit assessment structure, which is slightly different, but it too is also voted on by property owners. So in both of these instances, we didn't go out and try and test the registered voter universe. We went to the property owner universe, and there's a lot of differences between the two. I mean, there's a lot of overlap, but there are some significant differences. For instance, owners of commercial properties, rental properties, all kinds of various other types of properties. Could be people who don't live in this town and aren't registered to vote here. So that's a big difference. Is also these types of fees would have to be assessed to public agencies, school districts, the city itself, things like that. So those, although we didn't actually sample the school district and the city specifically, but some of these other entities like commercial owners were included in the sampling for this. So that's a distinction between the types of ballot measures we're looking at in the future for this, as opposed to a traditional ballot measure that most of you are familiar with. So we may talk a little bit more about that as we go along. I'm trying to get this to go forward. There we go. So this is just a review of what we ended up with in the financial analysis a year ago. The annual requirement to fulfill all the needs that the city staff identified was $8.4 million per year in the current year. And that would be divided up amongst these three main programs. Operations and maintenance would be 3.6 million. The lagoon dredging, if you recall, we boiled that down to an annual life cycle cost of about $1.9 million. And then the capital program would require another $2.9 million in order to pursue all the other capital projects other than the lagoon dredging. That equates to about $192 per year for the average home. Some properties would pay more based on how much impervious surface they have that would create runoff from rainstorms. And so that works out to $192 a year is allocated, as you see across the bottom there. So since we're looking at ballot measures, we also want to take a look and see what other cities have done for stormwater fee ballot measures. And I'll be honest with you, in the last 10 years, there have not been very many. These are the only ones we're aware of, primarily since 2016. I threw an early one in Burlingame just because they're nearby, and that was one that passed. The three that you see here that are crossed out are the measures that voters rejected. These did not succeed and those fees were not imposed. But the other 7 did pass. And you see there's a smattering of rates, anywhere from $50 on up to almost $164 here. So your $192 rate is definitely on the high end of the rates that have been passed out there. But we'll talk a little more about the support level for that and where we think we'll go on that. I also want to point out that 2 of the losses were Moraga and Los Altos. Admittedly, they're fairly affluent communities, and both of them shot down the fees. Those were the 2 that had no prior fee. So we don't know if it's a trend. We don't have a lot of data points here, but cities that don't have a fee in place already that they're trying to increase, they're trying to start a new one, in other words, I think that's a little more of an uphill battle. And unfortunately, that's the situation that San Mateo finds itself in. So we're going to also take that into account, although we think that's baked into the survey results that we have. So we think we have that accounted for. So on the stormwater survey, I'll just jump right to some of the results here. And let me explain what you see on the screen here. We see 2 rate levels. We tested a $192 rate, which is what you see here on the right column. We also tested a lower rate of $120 a year. And these colors represent green. The green section represents strongly supporting that fee. The light green is somewhat supportive of the fee. The orange is somewhat opposition to the fee, and the red is definitely opposed to the fee. So it's not uncommon for the definite on the negative side to be the largest factor here. These are even larger than we see sometimes. But if you add the 2 greens together, that basically gives you the support level. So we're shooting for a 50% majority on a stormwater balloting. And you see that the $120 fee comes up very, very close to that 50% support level. The $192 fee comes in at little under 47%. So that's falling short of the 50% threshold that you would need to pass the fee. But I also want to mention the margin of error. Our margin of error for this fee was 3.4%. That's plus or minus. So if we put in sort of a zone around those support levels of plus or minus 3.4%, you can see that the true support could be actually less by 3.4%, or around 46.5% on the $120 rate. So that's cutting it closer than we'd like to see as far as recommending proceeding strictly on that. But we have some thoughts about that we'll get into a little later on. But I just want to mention that in the survey itself, we didn't use annual rates like I'm reporting here. We actually used monthly rates of $10 and $16. And if we do a ballot measure, we would probably do that similarly. But we converted it to annual rates here just so we can compare this, the annual budget, these support levels, and then the lagoon support levels. So they're all on an annual basis for comparison's sake. Now, we also tested some statements. These are just keywords from those statements. I think in your staff reports, you see actual copies of the surveys themselves, so you can see the full statement. So these aren't always completely representative, but I think the keywords kind of capture what's going on. And this is not quite like the 50% threshold we were looking at in the other ones. We're just gauging how many people think that that is a good thing that will help them approve the fee versus how many people think it's a bad thing, that it wouldn't help them approve the fee. So that's the green versus the red here. And we also have a middle ground here where it's of no influence. So we cascaded these by support levels of the two greens added together. So you see, we actually find three tranches of level of support here. The top three all kind of came in the same. And what we were pleased to find out is that they are a varied group of interests. The first one deals with local flooding and aging infrastructure. Aging infrastructure is a term that a lot of people in the public have been hearing a lot lately, and they're familiar with that. The second one was trash removal and pollution controls. Got almost as much support. In fact, the much more likely part of that was actually higher. And then the third one is a fiscal responsibility item, that the funds are dedicated only to stormwater and they cannot be taken away by the state or the county or even the city council for that matter. They can't reappropriate these funds over to buy new police cars or playgrounds or other things. It has to be used strictly for stormwater. So those are three pretty good messaging points that resonate with the community and helps to show their values and their priorities here. Then we jump to the bottom. We have three that are kind of bringing up the rear. And as you notice, the word lagoon is in each of those three at the bottom. And it's not entirely surprising that as they look at stormwater as a whole, that dredging in the lagoon or even the lagoon as a recreational facility didn't rate real high. So that's something we're going to take note of as we go forward in how we message this and what aspects of this that we focus on when we work with the public if we move forward into a ballot measure. So let's jump to the lagoon only funding. This is a little different survey, and the costs are allocated to the properties a little differently. And that reminds me, I should mention that each survey that people got showed an actual dollar amount that they might be paying. So someone who owns a commercial property would see a larger dollar amount than someone who's in a single family home. So it helps to weigh their willingness to pay and their priorities on this based on how much they might be asked to pay. So we think that's a good surveying technique, and we've had good results with that. The lagoon only funding is a benefit assessment, and that's what was proposed here. And it's intended to fund the Marina Lagoon life cycle costs of $1.9 million. We put in 3 tiers of assessment levels, and that included people who right on the frontage of the lagoon would pay the most. We figured that they would be willing to have the lagoon in good shape, good for recreation, and environmentally healthy. Then people within walking distance would pay a pretty good amount too. And then everyone else in town would be asked to pay just a nominal amount because the lagoon really is a civic amenity and facility. So everyone else would be asked to pay something, but not much. That fee structure, unfortunately, only generates about $500,000 per year, which is only about 1/4 of what the total cost is for the lagoon. So it doesn't get us very far. We knew that going in. So we put together a second rate structure, which was the same array of rates. It just went up to $350 for the frontage and down to $23 for everyone else in town. That would generate $1.2 million, It's not the full 1.9 million, but we felt like it was enough to actually do some good work with. But the bottom line here is that this would fund part of the lagoon and none of the rest of the stormwater structure. So this only gets us partway there, and you'd probably have to go after another funding mechanism to make this viable. So that was sort of baked into our thinking as we went through. But let's drop back to the two rates, the $10 rate or the $23 rate. It's the same kind of chart we saw before. Again, for a benefit assessment, we're looking for a 50% approval rate to have this thing pass voters. As you see here, the $10 rate exceeded the 50%, and the $23 rate exceeded it less, but it's still above 50%. And if you take the margin of error and put it in there, the $10 rate still is above the 50% margin. So that's a pretty viable measure, we think. I want to point out one other thing for benefit assessments. The people who pay the higher rate, like the lagoon frontage properties, would pay more. Their vote also counts more. It's a weighted vote system for benefit assessments, and that's factored into these results here too. So the projects and issues for the lagoon was somewhat similar. We had three kind of tranches that emerged here. Again, the top ones, even just talking about the lagoon, was remove trash and pollution, came out very high. Increased flood capacity in the lagoon came out pretty high. And it's safe, clean, healthy water was another environmental issue that rated pretty high. And again, the fiscal responsibility. Funds are dedicated and can't be taken. That was important. If we jump to the bottom, interestingly enough, on a lagoon-centric survey, the fact that it pays for lagoon dredging came out not very popular. And then the one at the very bottom is, we mentioned that we wanted to make sure we were fair in what we portray. We put in a negative question, and that is another fee may be needed to fund the entire thing. And of course, that got a pretty big negative. That's one of the ones that really has a lot of red over here, and the red and the orange come down past the 50 line. So that's a pretty negative argument that we would have to be prepared to address if we went out to the public on this. So here's what we found after looking at all of these. The lagoon results are higher, but the revenue potential is much less, as I mentioned before. The stormwater results are below the comfort zone, but a lower rate. If we went not down to 120, but actually down to maybe 100 or a little less, we think the support level would come up. And that's an axiom we see in almost all of our surveys, is that there's a good correlation between a higher rate gets lower support, a lower rate gets higher support. It's a typical inverse relationship, and we bear that out survey after survey that we do. One of the few times where that didn't happen, things weren't equal between the two rates. The higher rate actually boasted more capital projects to get done, smarter capital work to get done. And that actually rated higher, even though it was a higher rate. But again, when all things are equal, a higher rate gets lower support. So that's a relationship that we can rely on in these surveys. So stormwater projects and issues, the top tier of issues includes flooding, environmental issues, and fiscal responsibility. Those are good, solid things to build on. The lagoon has little support in the stormwater projects. Unfortunately, it just doesn't seem to resonate with the community, other than obviously the people who live right on it. The lagoon projects and issues, the top tier includes the same flooding, environmental, and fiscal responsibility, but the bottom tier for the lagoon projects are the lagoon projects. So that's kind of an upside down thing to pursue, and it just doesn't bode well for that type of measure. So our tentative recommendations are this. We recommend that you move away from the lagoon assessment for now. There's just a lot of things that are flawed in this. It doesn't raise enough money. The core work rate's really low among the people who do support it. We recommend you move forward on the stormwater fee, but we suggest you move below the $100 per year level, maybe an $8 per month type fee. Now that's less revenue, and we are working to determine how far that will get us into the needed work that we have to get done. But we think that's a solid approach, is to get what you can. and not just simply go after $190 a year because you need it and be all or nothing, because you probably get nothing that way. So we recommend you tailor this and then maybe rely on the general fund a little bit, a lot less than before, but still some, to get some critical projects done and so forth. And then initiate a robust community engagement program. We haven't done that yet. We're going to wait until we talk to the council, which is coming up soon, and see what they say, if they give us a green light to start engaging the community. Other recommendations are to continue with the fee study. We've already started work on that. We're well along on the data work and the needs we already did last year. So we're well along on that. We need to coordinate with other city priorities and initiatives. And when we look at the timeline, we'll address that a little bit in a moment. And to schedule the balloting to avoid the November elections. We're at an interesting time of year where if you just schedule this out on a normal progression, we might be sending out ballots right about the same time that the November elections occur. And we don't want to do that. With these property owner elections, you're not tied to election dates. And we strongly recommend you stay away from the traditional election dates because there's so much distraction on voters that you're not going to get the attention that this issue really deserves. So we recommend that you push this to early 2023. And it really doesn't hurt the city to push it into that. And we'll talk about that on the next slide in the timeline. So let's go through this. So we start now and we draw out a timeline bar. The first thing is to keep going with the fee study. So we're already working on it. We would continue going. We anticipate these red stars, by the way, are going to be city council stops. So we are scheduled to present this basically the same information to the city council in a couple of weeks. Of course, we'll add to it the feedback and comments we get tonight. And then down the line in the summer, early summer, we have a tentative slot to maybe come back to this commission if we think that there's some twists or turns in the fee study that we want you to take another look at. We'll leave it up to staff and the chair here to see if we want to, and of course what we find in the fee study, to see if that's necessary or desirable. And then when the fee study's wrapped up, we will bring it to city council for a study session. This will be the first time they will have seen the fee study, so we don't expect them to act on it all at one time. So it'll be a pretty substantial study session to look at all the issues going on. And then we would come back maybe in a month or 2 months, depending on what we need to turn it around again, and hopefully get a final approval for this in the middle of the fall, maybe October or so. So this is just at the city council level. We won't be doing any formal notices to the public at this point in time. And then we have the break. So we would take somewhat of a public vacation, not be out into the public during the election season and the holiday season, and wait until the beginning of 2023, at which time, if we get this far, is to send out a notice. There's a 45-day notice requirement for this type of fee. You have to mail notices, and it's a notice of a public hearing, which will be in front of the city council, probably in early spring, maybe in March. And then if we get through the hearing process, okay, then we would go to the balloting process. So it's a two-step process, a little different from water rates and sewer rates. This has that second balloting process out there. And that's another 45-day period. And then you would conclude the balloting in late spring, possibly in May. I just want to point out that we would have a community engagement process throughout the entire thing. Once we get the city council to give us the nod later this month, if they go along with that, we would be working a community engagement process. And we do have some good thoughts on how that would proceed at this point. The funding would begin in fiscal year 23-24. The way these fees would be collected, if it proceeds and succeeds, would be on the property tax bills, much like your sewer fees are. And that's a once a year deadline to get that submitted to the county so it can go on the county tax bills. And that deadline is August. So whether we do the balloting here during the election season and holiday season, or whether we push it out till spring, it doesn't matter. We still can't get anything in to the county before the August deadline for the next year's tax bills. So it does not impact the revenue stream by delaying this into a more comfortable time slot on the calendar. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Sarah and for any closing remarks, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Thank you, Jerry. That was really great presentation, very informative, and that's the end of our presentation. So I'm going to open it up for questions and comments.
Thank you both. At this time, I'd like to see if commissioners have questions. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any. Thank you, Commissioner Reyes. Please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very helpful presentation. Can you speak to the prospective $100 per average property cost per year, what that means in terms of total annual funds and how staff envisions that would be allocated between those three major buckets of operations, lagoon, and capital projects?
Good question. The revenue is basically a proration of the rates. So if you scale back the rates from 192 to 96, that basically cuts your 8.4 million in half. So that's the revenue range where we would be looking at for that. If you recall in the financial analysis, we had a rate of $16 a month, $12.50 a month, and then $10 a month. The difference between the $16 a month and the $12.50 a month wasn't a change in any expenses. It was a change in whether or not we continued to rely on the sewer and garbage rates for a little bit of help here. And we would probably recommend that you continue with that. It's something you've been doing for a lot of years, and there's some good nexus between the two, and I think it's a solid approach. Then you have to start cutting into the rest of it's funded by the general fund, and to whatever extent you roll back, you either have to cut back levels of service or look to the general fund for some help there. And that's what we haven't quite calibrated that in yet to see how much we need to cut back on levels of service. I don't have the number in front of me, but I think of that 8.4 million, about 650,000 was enhanced levels of service for operations and maintenance. Maybe those are types of things. And then capital projects. We were going to keep a good array of capital projects. So maybe you cut back on the pace of the projects that you put out and the pace at which you ramp up your levels of service. So those are all the things we'll be looking at as we get into the fee study. We haven't quite got that far yet, but we definitely, it's on our mind. I mean, that's big elephant in the room as we go forward and consider these lower rates.
Mm-hmm. Follow-up question. I think just for purposes of public education, for people who may be new to the topic, it might be worth just briefly highlighting the kind of work that would be happening under this funding. So when we say operations, when we say lagoon, when we say capital projects, what do those things mean in practice, tangible terms that people can understand? Yes, good point. No, and I'm inviting explanation for the public here in the meeting. Oh, you want me to address it here? Yes.
Jerry, I can address some of it. Hi, good evening. Azalea Mitch, Public Works Director. Yes, good question. Operating, we mean the day-to-day, what it takes to run the stormwater system. So we have many pump stations, for example. So it's the maintenance that's required and the operation of those facilities. It's the cleaning of storm drains. It's the addressing the water quality issues in the lagoon. So those are the day-to-day operational expenses. In terms of capital, these are improvements, infrastructure improvements. We've been upgrading our pump stations, for example. We have been rehabilitating the pumps at the Marina Lagoon. So anything that's infrastructure related. And then the third bucket, as Jerry noted, is really what it would take to dredge the lagoon, which, all of these, except for a small section, like Jerry noted, that we've been using the nexus there between solid rates and sewer rates, but everything else comes out of the general fund, and some may be funded through Measure S. So we sort of cobble together, certain buckets, but there is no dedicated funding source for all the operational capital needs.
Great. Thank you for that. I would advise that every time presentation is given, either at a commission or at the council, that it be given in a way that people can understand tangibly what we're talking about, because it is an education opportunity and many people listening will not know what we're talking about. So I would highly encourage starting with very tangible things. This is what this kind of funding would do and why it's important to the community. But I have no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Reyes. Commissioner Lewinsky, thank you, please.
Let's see. I just have, let me just start off with my my easier questions here. Of the 15, there was roughly about 1,500 responses that were returned. What was the breakout between the stormwater cohort of that 1,500? How many came back from the stormwater and how many came back from the marina-centric cohort within that 1,500?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I looked that up. I was prepared for that. They were actually pretty close. The stormwater returned 809 and the lagoon folks returned 741.
Okay.
So there's about 70 difference between the two.
Okay. Alrighty. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And this is a question I have received from the public. And Sarah, you and I had talked about this afternoon. That is a question I have gotten is, does this funding improve or enhance our current pedestrian, and I'll say public pedestrian walkways or walkways that are in the lagoon, that circumvent the lagoon? For example, Sarah, as you had let me know that there is a public walkway in the northern part of the lagoon from Joinville Park over to Phantom Drive. And then there's a public walkway that runs pretty much parallel along the Harborview condominiums. But is any of this funding available to enhance those walkways, add more public walkways along the lagoon? Is that even possible?
Right, I can comment on that. And I do have the pictures if you'd like me to share
Sure.
them.
Yeah, I think let's show the public, going back to the point that Commissioner Reyes has just brought up. Let's look at what's available now on the north end and then over on Harborview.
Can you see this picture?
Let's see.
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yep.
Okay, so this is the Harbor Town, actually.
Harbor Town. Thank
Harbor
you.
Town. Yeah. So they have a path that starts out just north of Fashion Island right here, 92, and travels, the length of their property. So I think they put that in, but it's a public walkway. And then let me share the other one. That's Harbor Town. And this is the walkway near Joinville Park that starts in Joinville Park, wraps around, cruises by the dog park over here, along by the pump stations, and around to Fathom Drive.
Right.
And this also connects to the Bay Trail.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah. So we don't have any current plans to expand the walkways. Most of the homes and parcels along the lagoon are private property, and we do have an easement along their private property, but the easement is dedicated for maintenance and maintenance and operation of the lagoon and maintaining the banks and the shoreline. We would have to look into legally how we would make that easement available for a public walkway, and that hasn't been something that's brought up before.
Yeah. What it begs the attention, because Foster City has a very long contiguous public walkway along their side of the lagoon.
Yeah.
which starts south of the 92 bridge and goes on for eons and is part of the Bay Ridge Trail, or the Bay Ridge Trail. I think it's worth. I think it's something worth exploring. As and I'll just put it out here, as we're adding more and more people to the city, people need venues to go outside and relax. And frankly, this is all part of the lagoon is touted in the material that was sent to the public as the gem of the city. And I think this would really add some sparkle to that gem. So I would like to put that on the radar screen there, to explore that option, and see where it goes. Here's another question I have is, obviously $16 a month, and I'm just going to focus in on the stormwater cohort and not the marina, the lagoon-centric cohort. But in that, $16 a month was proposed, $192 a year. That didn't make it. We're looking at roughly something of $8 a month to $96 a month. And that will bring in roughly, if I understood Jerry, $4.2 million per year, short of the 8.4 that is needed. And we just had a discussion in terms of how, what we'll call some temporary solutions, that is using fund, getting money out of the general fund as well as the sewage and garbage rate collection. But explain to me, somewhere this rate is going to have to increase. And maybe this is done during the fee assessment to go from 8 ultimately into something higher. Does anybody have a sense of what that increase in the rate would be and how that would move forward? Assuming and make the assumption that the property owners in the city do pass the $100 per year.
Another good question. We typically see when on these storm drain rates that have to be balloted, you're walking a fine line between a fixed firm rate that they can vote on and rely on versus something that increases forever. Oftentimes we tie it to the consumer price index. That's a horrible way to run a utility, but it's sort of the best we have when we're at the whim of the voters. Your water rates would never do that. Your sewer enterprise would never do that, because there's so many things that come into play in running a physical infrastructure entity like this. And especially when you're starting, halfway up the hill and you really want to get to the top. But probably in order to get this amenable to voters, you would just simply tie it to the consumer price index. You might even put a cap, typically a 3% cap on in any year. For instance, this year when the CPI is like 4.2%, you'd only collect 3% increase. So there's some assurances to voters that it's under control. If you did that, you would have to then go back to voters. If you said, okay, we're going to bump this up another 40% in order to get closer to where we want to be, you would have to go back out to voters at another time, which is an expensive proposition, obviously, and a lot of effort. So it's not ideal, but that's likely the way we would be recommending to go, just to try and keep on the safe side of the voters.
Right. And like I said, I cannot underestimate, by the way, how important I believe, this commissioner believes, that finding dedicated funding for these projects, the lagoon and all the stormwater, is very, very important. And getting it, like I said, this would be our first initial attempt. And as with anything, the first time is the hardest. So the suggestion is to keep it maybe tagged to the CPI, the local CPI, Bay Area CPI, I'm assuming, not national CPI. I'm hearing yes. Is that
yes? Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then, based on that, I could see the city, unfortunately, pulling off the general fund and the garbage and sewer funds for quite a while, to adequately fund, because we're already, even at $96, we're 50% behind. And as we know, infrastructure doesn't get cheaper, it gets more expensive as time goes on.
We've done some analysis of rate structures, and utility rates range from 4% to 6% per year over like 10, 15-year long hauls. because there's so many other things going into it. Aging infrastructure is a big part of it. Regulation, you don't want to try and float that to voters. They don't have sympathy for us complying with regulations. But there's a lot of advancement in environmental issues and how to help solve them through our infrastructure management. So cost of a basket of groceries at the store is not a good gauge for what it costs to run a utility like this.
Yeah,
like
absolutely.
I said, it's kind of the best.
I might argue CPI might be a little too conservative if utilities are using 4 to 6%, personally. And just because even at $100 per property per year, we're still well behind where we need to be. Mm-hmm. In some degree, you wonder if, well, I guess something's better than nothing. Might be the way to look at that. Another question, my final question I have is, while we're talking about, at this point, $100 per year per property in the city to fund these important projects. Sarah, talk to me a little bit about staff, because I'm trying to get a sense of overall costs here. So we have the fee assessment to voters, but, we'll probably have to hire staff, which means payments of salaries and benefits and pensions and other retirement costs. Do we have a sense of how many staff would be needed and what the additional costs to the city are for doing that?
Yeah, I think in the additional needs that we identified in the funding analysis, we identified around 2.5 full-time employees that would be needed for the additional work that we identified, which was around that $650,000 or so dollars, and that would be for things like enhanced catch basin cleaning, and for creek cleaning, if we get permits to take care of the creeks and maintain the creeks, and a little bit for an environmental compliance inspections as well, to perform stormwater inspections at commercial and industrial facilities.
Right, and that $650,000, that was out of the $3.6 million in operations, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So those would be 2 additional FTEs. And how much is an FTE in our city? About $300,000 a year?
I think that's pretty high, but fully loaded, I would have to get back to you on that.
Yeah, I would be curious what a FTE of this, what at this level would be, because that is additional costs in addition to the user fees. And, we currently run a deficit, particularly on our pension side of the house. So,
sure.
Okay. So if you could get back to the commission on that, would appreciate it. That is all the questions I have at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rowinski. I believe Vice Chair Narita had her hand up first. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for that great presentation, which really helped to elucidate a lot of questions I had on the report that was sent beforehand. Really appreciate that. Couple additional clarifications, and as context, this is my first time with a stormwater issue. I was not on the commission beforehand. So, for my benefit and maybe for the benefit of the public, I'm going to ask some basic questions and then we'll get into some other questions. To ultra clarify, the lagoon only survey was just about that one piece of the overall pie that's needed for stormwater issues. But the overall stormwater survey, if that's successful at the ballot, would still do the same types of work that the lagoon only survey was talking about, right?
Right.
Okay. I think there's some misunderstanding in the public. We got some comments in our email inbox that might have suggested a misunderstanding there. So moving forward with the stormwater survey and ballot initiative would still address the lagoon needs. And then, additionally, I was curious to understand if when the survey was created and the different themes were tested, by the survey recipients, responders, where exactly did the like concepts of safety come in again? I don't remember if it was on the slide that you had presented or if safety hadn't come up yet. My impetus for asking is we had that tragedy in the city of Millbrae back in December where 2 people died in a flooding issue in the underpass of a Caltrain overpass situation because the flooding happened so quickly that rescue responders were not able to get to one of the cars that had 2 people in it and they drowned. They were able to save another car with 2 people who were able to, survive that incident. But correct me if I'm wrong, Jerry, but that's stormwater. That's the stormwater case. Like that is the stormwater issues, right?
Yes, it is.
And so this work that we're trying to address is also a safety concern. And so could you refresh my memory on where did safety fall in all of that, or was safety something that was message tested?
As far as the survey goes, we didn't do a safety test on that. I'm going to defer to staff to talk about the overall makeup of your storm drain system. I think in Millbrae, that was an unfortunate underpass situation, and I don't know if there was a pump that failed and allowed that to flood. I know with some of our other clients, they have these underpass situations that need localized pumping to keep it clear, and it's a very sensitive and an important issue. And I don't know if you have those kinds of issues here or not. I see Azalea's come on here. I'll let.
Sure. Yes. So we definitely, there are areas that we know are where there's localized flooding. But we have the safety component is very much focused on our pump stations. We have to make sure anytime there's a rain event that we have the fueling, the backup power set up, that everything is ready to run. So that is part of the safety component. Something that Sarah mentioned, we do a lot of storm drain cleanups. So there's a lot of leaf matter. So there's a lot of preparation work that goes into that the events before a storm. And so that is the safety component. And we also keep an eye on sections of the city that do tend, are prone to flooding. So it is, and we do staff up during those events as well. For example, the 20-year event that we had in October, we actually, one of the pumps at the 28th Avenue undercrossing failed, and that flooded at 7 a.m. Luckily, there was no one on the road, and we received calls, but we managed to get the contractor and electrician to address that pump failure. So, but that is the way that we manage safety, is by really making sure that our pump stations are up and running and that we have the backup power in the case of electrical failure. And so those are operational costs.
That goes under the operational costs, yeah. Yes. And so, Jerry, was safety one of the messages that were tested in that like heat range thing that you have from green to red?
It wasn't. Local flooding and aging infrastructure were at the top, but the keywords of safety weren't included. That would go though with local flooding, and that's a good feedback for future messaging. I think that would resonate well.
Yeah, I think I'll say my comments, but I just wanted that clarification. Thank you. And then additional kind of getting to my meatier questions then, Jerry, like I struggle to understand the dip down to $100 per year, given the data. And I still, to be honest, I'm struggling with that. Can you clarify, like, what I feel like we might just be operating in a data, like without, data to back us up. So then, going forward, is it that you'll do another round of surveying at $100 a year, or would things move forward in the timeline that you had articulated in your presentation without an assurance that $100 a year would actually get you that margin of error that you want to get?
Yeah. Yeah, we did not test at $100 or $96. True. But it's not that far out of the range. It's always dangerous to extrapolate when you have a curve that's based on some empirical data, which is sort of what we have. We have 2 points. You can draw a line and say the reality moves along that line. And to extrapolate outside of that range, there is some risk, but this is not very far outside the range. We also believe that when converted to an annual amount, when you go from 3 digits to 2 digits, there is a little bit of a psychological bump you get from people that saying, well, $95 is, it's significantly better than $105, even though it's only 10% difference in dollar amounts. So there is a little bit of a psychological edge. I don't have empirical data on that, but we have noticed that in some of our measures. There is no guarantee. In fact, there's no guarantee on any of these results. Obviously, this is predictive in its nature. So we wouldn't plan on surveying again just to test the lower rate. However, I would leave the door open for some tracker surveys, which would be a briefer survey to test where we're at. If some major events happened, World War III, we used to joke about that, but it's not such a joke anymore. Other economic pressures, inflation is getting more real all the time. So there are some factors that were already present when we surveyed, but might increase. So we might leave the door open for that. But typically, our experience shows that there is a direct relationship between the amount we're asking people to pay and the amount of support. And if you vary one, you vary the other in the opposite direction. And we feel like we're close enough to where you just need a little extra bump. And we think dropping it down below the $100 level would get you pretty close to that.
Okay. I still remain a little confused because the 2 data points that we have, there's a $72 difference between them, and yet we only saw a 3% difference in level of support between those two. So on the extrapolations, could you put up the slide with the other cities again?
Yeah. Let's see. Where are we at? Come on, respond.
Thank you.
Hit it.
And so basically, the town of Los Altos, like you mentioned, is one of the wealthiest places in the entire, Bay Area. And they declined an $88 fee despite their wealth in their property owners at a first time thing. So like that data point is like a mark against it, right? In a way. And yet at the same time, the voting populace in the survey seemed pretty strong. So I feel like we're all just making suppositions at this point outside of the range of 120 and 192. But do you have any more information about the town of Los Altos' case study?
I'm sorry, information about the what? I missed a word.
The town of Los Altos, what was the percent delta there?
Yeah, I actually worked on that project, and I don't remember. I think the support level came in about 47 or 48%. Now, we had actually surveyed there and found a level of support in the above 55%. So that was actually not as predictive, but we did identify some things that happened between the survey and the actual ballot measure. The biggest one was a very contentious vote on the city council to go ahead. The council voted 3-2 to ask the voters to vote on this. So 2 council members were adamantly against even asking voters for their opinion. And it got very contentious, and I think that leaked over, even though on the dais, they talked about not campaigning for their 2 opposing sides, the champion and the opponent, had this discussion on a very interesting council meeting, by the way. And they kind of half enthusiastically nodded and agreed to not campaign their thing. But I think it bled over. And when you have it, and that's what happened in Moraga too. We had a strong opposition campaign, very well organized. In Moraga, they even had lawn signs against it. I mean, I've never seen such a thing for this type of thing. So that's what happened in Los Altos. They also had some skeletons in the closet that came back to haunt them about a prior ballot measure that failed, and then the city built the thing anyway. Things like that we weren't aware of during the survey. So there was a lot of dynamics at play with Los Altos. One of the thing, and this works with Los Altos and Moraga both affluent communities, we're finding the affluent communities are very fiscally conservative. And that's kind of an uphill battle there too. Again, not a lot of data points to make it a rule of thumb, but I think it's a tough crowd to sell. And then the organized opposition in both cities, I think, sunk those.
Jerry, could you share the slide with the support? Because I think an important piece as well is when you look at the breakdown of the no's and your experience in terms of, your guidance here and advice in terms of determining that rate where we could definitely get more support. But if you can talk a little bit more about the definite no's and probably no's.
Yeah, what we find is where you're going to get movement is in the probably no's and probably yeses. The definite no's, definite yeses, you're not going to move those people with more information or some education or some compelling arguments. But where we have room to move, and it's not a very big room, I admit, that 9.6% in the probably no's, we would want to try and pick up some of those people without losing some of the probably yeses. So we are very close, but we think if we move another tranche down to $96, that will move that up. It's still a bit of a gamble, we admit, but I think it's worth moving forward. We could also, I suppose we could consider moving even lower, like to $7 or $7.50 a month, something like that, to try and ensure that. And those are definitely things that we are still going to look at a little further, I think. But that's what we're looking at, is that orange area, is whether we can move some of those people into the green. Some of the red people may go into orange, but it's still a no at the end of the day. And likewise on the green half of the chart.
Yeah, the definitely no's are very consistent, right? They're just the ones who don't want any fee whatsoever. Right. The price point doesn't seem to really matter. I'm curious though, like, what is the path forward if you want to keep the 120 per month, or you simply don't want to move forward knowing that, like this information is just like an absolute no-go to just retain the 120, per year?
It's not necessarily a no-go. We've actually had clients that had, support in the 45 to 47% range, and they still wanted to go with that level. And then they put in a very robust effort to get the word out, to educate the community, make sure they had the best compelling argument, short of advocacy. But we've had a couple of success stories over the last 15 years where they've actually moved the needle up quite a bit between the survey and the support. We've also had to move the other direction, like I mentioned in Los Altos.
Yeah, thank you. And then curious, I think maybe this is a question for Sarah and Azalea. Like, what does it look like in terms of like the partnership network or partnership community out there when this goes to, a ballot initiative? Does the city work in partnership to educate, and reach out to others that could do the advocacy that Jerry mentioned, but, is not the city itself? And does the city do that kind of education and outreach? Or is this, in creating a network of partners to help get the word out?
I can talk a little bit about that. We haven't fully defined what our outreach strategy will look like. We've just started it, but there is the possibility of having a citizen group take on a lead effort in being the advocates, even raising money through different organizations and campaigning door to door for us and that type of thing. I'm not sure if we have that level of support in the community. Maybe when we hear public comment, I see a few people in the audience who may want to comment on that. I did meet with a couple of community members early on in the process who indicated marginal support for something like that. But otherwise, we would look towards finding the citizen working groups, meeting with HOAs, and using all the different social media channels that we use. Our website, we're very open to different types of outreach and coordinating with different stakeholders. We just haven't fully defined that yet.
Great. Thank you. Those are all my questions.
Thank you, Vice Chair Narita. Commissioner Robbins, go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah, I didn't see this in the materials, so I think I know the answer, but outside the survey or in any of the outreach, was there ever a discussion of possible coordination with Foster City, who has considerable shoreline on the affected lagoons and where the creeks run as well?
I think I missed part of that.
It's probably for you, Sarah, anyway. Was there any outreach that included coordination with Foster City?
We have not talked about coordinating with Foster City, since it would be a property related fee for San Mateo property owners. That's not something that we've explored. Does seem fair that somehow they would pay for some of the benefits of the lagoon, but I'm not sure how to answer that question fully. I'd have to talk with the director and with the city manager and finance to find out what our options are there and get back to you.
Okay, yeah, I'll have a comment on that at the comment period. Thank you.
Okay. I have at least one question. A number of questions I may have thought to ask have been asked by other commissioners or answered through the presentation and discussion, which is great. I'll start with my question I know I have, which expands a little bit on what we've discussed, but I presume that this recommendation from staff and the consultant is based a bit on the idea that some of the probably no's, as we were discussing, that came out of this survey could be converted to probably or definitely yes via the outreach campaign. So I was thinking of asking Jerry if you could talk a little bit to a sense of about how much can be moved in that way from average or recent campaigns, and maybe staff could talk a little bit more about current ideas on what outreach might focus on or highlight given the results we've received, because I think my feeling was before the survey we were thinking about the lagoon as playing prominently in the outreach, and given that it didn't do as well as we anticipated, I wonder if staff still feels comfortable with the idea that outreach will still give the bump that we need.
I'll start off by saying that the survey went out relatively cold. We didn't do any kind of information campaign other than what was in the envelope with the survey. Although we tried to be fairly thorough, we didn't want to make it too dense of a read. So it was just an introduction. I think we have an opportunity in front of us over the next 8 or 9 months to get a robust campaign out. We've already started designing some architecture for not only what the messages are, but how to get it out, how to reach different stakeholders, general segments of the community, and to try and help them understand that, first of all, storm drainage is a thing, and that it's an important thing. And I think a lot of people may have read the survey and got a little bit of that sense, but I think we have an opportunity to penetrate the market with a lot more. And I think we have a nice time frame in which to work. I'll leave it there as a start. I don't know if Sarah or Zelia want to pitch in a little on that.
Yeah, no, I think focusing on the messages that the survey indicated people care about, being, the environment and preventing pollution, would definitely be part of the messaging, as well as just letting people, like Jerry said, letting them know what the stormwater system is, why it's important, why it's important to invest in it. We're thinking about, creating a branding, somehow branding the stormwater system in our messaging, doing a lot of listening to the stakeholders and opinion leaders, and just educating the community at large. I mentioned citizen working groups, our existing city outreach strategies and media channels, and taking advantage of the existing community groups and working with them as much as possible, hopefully finding somebody who's interested in helping us out there as far as advocating, which we're not technically allowed to do in the end. We can educate people about what it is that's coming up, but we won't be able to say, vote for this, I think, Jerry, if I'm correct.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's see. At this point, we're not necessarily locked into pursuing a property ballot at $100 a year or $96 a year, right? It seems to me like the timeline given showed a fee study to be done still, and even at this decision point or at the council's decision point in March. It seemed like there may still be flexibility on that and more information to be gleaned. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think that's right. We're not we're pointing in that direction. We haven't landed on a final spot. Like I said, we have some fiscal analysis to do with the lower revenue versus all the accomplishments we're trying to meet. So we need to find that balance. Ultimately, we may need to put together some internal funding commitments. For instance, general fund. Maybe we still show that there's maybe a $6 million program out there, but we're only going to get 4 from the fees, and we're looking for another 2 from general fund or other funding sources. So there's that whole internal set of recommendations to develop on the levels of service versus the fee level. So there is some disconnect and some room to be creative in that regard too. And that will happen between now and when we take it to the council in late summer, early fall.
Okay, thank you. I was curious a little bit about the prospect of potentially pursuing both a property ballot and a benefits assessment at the same time. Just from looking a little bit and going into this discussion, seeing, for example, that the property ballot had lagoon-based interests faring the worst out of the what was tested. And I guess thinking a little bit to the fact that we've seen recently gone through a districting process and now might be looking at this, or residents and people in the area might be looking at this as like a lagoon thing versus broader stormwater interests. I get the sense that we're the staff and the consultant are not recommending that at this time, because even with the lagoon assessment findings, it was not necessarily showing strong support for lagoon stuff on that. Is in addition, of course, to the logistical issues of having to ballot to send out. Can you maybe talk a little bit as to why like that wouldn't be considered or yeah.
Yeah, in fact, I think when we talked to you a year ago, we kind of brought up some of the quagmire that you get to when you're considering two measures. Are they competing? Are they companions? Is it one than the other? and it's a complex equation. I think the lagoon results had some internal flaws that were revealed, and the low level of funding. I think made our choice a lot easier to recommend setting aside for now. Now, that's not to say that if you get a stormwater fee, less than you want, but if you get it passed, that maybe you do come out with a lagoon-only type of funding, but you would want to have it be several years down the line. It's another city-wide ballot measure. Most cities the size of San Mateo don't take those on lightly. You're not San Francisco where you're floating 3 of these every election. No, you're going to be more judicious than that. And there may be other measures that come along, sales tax measures or other parcel taxes that the city needs for other things. City's got a lot of, fingers in a lot of pies, not just stormwater. So those are all factors. I would not recommend trying to do 2 at once because it's just confusing. I think people will go, wait a minute, they just will have a lot of questions that you're not going to be able to answer in 30-second sound bites.
Okay. I think that will conclude my questions at this time. Just going to double check, but I think so. And so at this time, I would like to open public comment. And for those interested in giving a public comment, please use the raise your hand function in the Zoom meeting if you're in the Zoom. This would be the time to do so. I see one hand. And if you are interested, please do hit that as we move into this. And Cookie, please feel free to call the first commenter.
First one is Mariva Godfrey.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for the presentation. And Commissioner Reyes, thank you. And Commissioner Narita, thank you for asking for clarity. First of all, you've talked a lot about a robust outreach needed to the public. I cannot emphasize that enough. I think it was a real mistake, I'll say it that way, to have 2 different surveys that confused the public. Even in the last commissioners meeting about the funding project or the funding results, Commissioner Reyes pointed out that very few people in San Mateo really know even of the existence of the lagoon. When we had city council members come and visit, some of them had never been here. So to separate the 2, one which is more understood by the public and one which is an entity, actually, thank you, Commissioner Rowinski, it's absolutely a gem of the city that people don't know about is really problematic. The other point that I want to make is the lagoon is a stormwater basin for the entire city of San Mateo. And there is no way that I believe, and this is supported by talking to my residents in Laguna Vista HOA, that they would support a special assessment just because we live on the lagoon. Okay, this has never ever happened before. And Mr. Bradshaw already pointed out that assessments that are issued for first timers typically do not pass. So I just really encourage that the recommendations of the commission be that the dredging that is needed currently, okay, two racings of the water have happened. Last year I had water. I live as far away in Laguna Vista from the inlet of the lagoon as you can. And last year I had water that covered at least the dirt. I will not tell you how deep it was. It wasn't very deep. This year it doesn't cover it. So the sedimentation issue continues. And what we don't want is the proverbial kicking of the can down the street. So for the sake of clarity, when you say put it off, it can't really be put off for too many other years. So those are my points, and I hope that you will consider them. So moving forward, but a strong outreach. This is not even considered a city park. Marina Lagoon is not considered a city park. It's not under a city parks list. and yet it is the biggest water skiing park in all of San Mateo County, and 4.5 miles of lots of recreation beyond its primary function, which is to keep us from flooding. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sherry Macro.
Okay, hello. Thank you. I'm a newbie here. I've never attended one of these before, but I live on the lagoon. I live in a condo complex, Marina Gardens, that's right on the lagoon. So I'm concerned about this, and I really do think you need to educate the public, because I didn't know all the stuff about the stormwater and how that, you know, intersects with the lagoon, and I'm on the HOA board at my condo here, and the reason I came tonight is because somebody from the board suggested that someone from our board listen to this, so that's why I'm here. So I do think you need to educate a lot. And in particular, an issue that I have is I walk my dog around the lagoon every day, and I walk down the stretch by the Lakeshore Apartments. I don't know if you're familiar with that. It's like going toward Hillsdale overpass. There's the Hillsdale overpass, and it's really dirty under that Hillsdale overpass. And on the path, we could use a garbage can on that path. There's garbage, and there's fallout from the trees. And I don't know whose job it is, if it's your department in the city or some other department in the city. There's all these trees and things drop there, and it's slippery. And plus, there's just a lot of garbage there. So I've been wanting to find out how to get that changed, to, you know, get rid of all that garbage that's under the underpass and on that path. Thank you.
Thank you.
I see no other hands raised. Oh, Rick Sakuda.
Okay, my name is Rick Sakuda. I represent the Marina Lagoon Action Committee, and I was one of the original founders of that group. We are sort of the umbrella organization for the homeowner groups and user groups around the Marina Lagoon, and we were founded in 1995. I think one of the critical aspects of our community is that it's everybody's stormwater, right? I think I'm going to coin a new phrase: water runs downhill, and we see that the water drains into the lagoon, and it would appear to be everybody's problem to address the stormwater issue, and not just put it back onto the homeowners around the Marina Lagoon. To that note, our community has been very active in raising funds and supporting city initiatives. Most recently, Measure W, where I was the treasurer, and one of our members, Rich Hedges, was the primary fundraiser. And that measure passed by, I think, over 70%. We were involved in Measure S, which raised about $230 million over 30 years. And I was the treasurer, and Rich Hedges, again, was the primary fundraiser. We've also been involved in Measure L and M and Measure A, and as well as obtaining FEMA funding, obtaining funding, $14 million of bond funding for FEMA reparations. So we've been involved in the community, and I kind of feel like now things have changed, and it's just falling back on us to fund all this, where we have been helping to fund all the other city measures. So I'd like to see some support from the community as a whole. And I think that just comes down to clever marketing. I know Jerry and Sarah have been racking their brains on how do we get this across. And I think that's just going to be the key, is just the marketing effort and how to sell this. And then, yeah, I don't want to see another further polarization of our society where it becomes us versus them, the people on the hill versus the people down in the lowlands, the people on the lagoon. We're all in this together. And just real briefly on the safety issue, by dredging the lagoon, that would increase the capacity if the lagoon were to be drawn all the way down preceding a major storm event. So as a safety factor, that would give us an additional safety margin if we could get the lagoon dredged a little deeper. I want to thank everybody for their time and their efforts on this. Everyone's doing a great job. I know you have some obstacles there, but we do recognize and appreciate your work on this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Keith Carlson.
Okay.
Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your efforts. First of all, my name is Keith Carlson, and I'm a 25-year resident of San Mateo, and specifically the lagoon. Currently, I live in Mariners 1 in a house that's on the lagoon. I completely agree with the previous comments, particularly Rick's. To me, there's two components to the lagoon, and the stormwater issues, of course, are critical. And the second is the lagoon being the gem that it is. And there's a few comments I have on this, and that is, I would highly encourage us not to get into any sort of us versus them type of mentality like Rick talked about. This is a San Mateo gem. It's a San Mateo beauty. Unfortunately, it's also a best kept secret. So as part of this initiative, whenever I'm doing infrastructure initiatives around my house, I always try and make some beauty improvements at the same time so I don't feel like I just did the infrastructure. And I like one of the supervisor's comments that said, let's beef up some of the paths around it. I think there's an opportunity here through marketing, through potentially some smaller high impact projects that could additionally beautify the lagoon while we're working on the critical infrastructure and make it not just the best kept secret, but one of the best things about San Mateo, which in my opinion, it is. So thank you for all your help. Really appreciate it. I enthusiastically support the work that you're doing and appreciate your help.
Thank you.
I see no other hands raised.
Okay. Thank you. I will close public comment at this time and bring it back to the commission. Before I go to commissioner comments, I did have a quick question based on the public comments. I wondered if someone on staff might be able to clarify for the public who might be someone who could who do you reach out to ask about putting in a garbage can in an area, just for clarity, and if someone wouldn't mind.
Yes, that would be my department, and you can reach directly out to me. I'm not sure how to get you my information, but we can look into that under the Lakeshore Apartments, under the Hillsdale Bridge. I'm not sure. I'm familiar with that particular area, but whether it's a garbage can or whether we get some staff or volunteer groups to clean it up, we can definitely look into that.
Excellent. Thank you, Sarah. And indeed, publicworks@cityofsanmateo.org is an email address that can always be used if public commenters feel they need a specific follow-up or response to questions and concerns. I just thought I would address that. I also had I realized I did forget a question earlier and just wanted to quickly ask for an update on any other funding partnership opportunities. Commissioner Robbins mentioned Foster City, but I think in the last time this came before our commission, we talked about the idea that we have something like One Shoreline, that the county has been looking into various aspects of stormwater. And I just wonder if there were any updates on potential funding sources from outside the city of San Mateo partnership opportunities.
I think I will defer to our director, Azalea, for that question.
Sure. So we work very closely with the City and County Association of Governments. So we actually talked about a county-wide stormwater fee. That was something that was proposed a few years ago. And given that we are many, as you saw from Jerry's list, there aren't many cities in the county that actually have a stormwater fee, and San Bruno's attempt failed recently. So we were regrouping and thinking, is it worthwhile to strategize and have a county-wide fee? The challenge here is that every city has unique conditions, right? And for us, it's our Marina Lagoon. For other cities, they may not have an $80 million dredging issue. So it became a bit challenging for us to figure out, well, what fee could we, collectively support, and would we be then sort of losing weight in terms of coming with a separate city-specific fee. So I have to say that there was not much traction on that effort because of the unique challenges from every city in the county. With respect to One Shoreline, we have been working with them. One of the mission statements, or it's not only One Shoreline was created not only to address sea level rise challenges, but also to look at stormwater, and so we do have a lot of competing needs. I don't know where they are on their ballot because they are also looking at a fee, but that's something that we're hoping to get an update on, soon to figure out where they are. But I would just say that every local jurisdiction has their own challenge, and so it becomes difficult to sort of prioritize needs.
Through the chair, Azalea, you answered my question on email about funding as well, but would you mind for the public talking about other state level, federal level funding plans that and work that you're doing in answer to the chair's question?
Oh, sure, absolutely. So through the infrastructure bill, we're currently working on a grant application, although it's transportation focused. But that's the effort that we've been focusing on in the last few weeks. However, we are looking at bringing grant writers on board who can help us really find opportunities so that we can obtain grant funding for efforts such as stormwater, efforts such as, Sarah, we've talked about green infrastructure. We have many needs. So indeed, but we need help writing all these grant applications. So we've been meeting with grant writers, and we're hoping to really, for over the next 5 years, figure out what opportunities we may have to fund all the capital needs that the master plans that we have and we have no funding for.
Thank you very much, Director Mitch and Vice Chair Narita. And now I'd like to recognize Commissioner Robbins, who has his hand raised.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I'm ready. I think we're at the comment portion. I just want to note, I know that the advocates for the marina community has been active for a long time, and I'm sympathetic to that. But I'm also, I'm a veteran of a number of parcel tax and sales tax efforts, and it's pretty clear that under sort of a burden benefit concept, your results don't surprise me. General benefit, things that are perceived as citywide or general benefit are going to be much better received than things that are items that are seen as more of a specific benefit. And that's just going to be a problem that's always going to happen with the lagoon folks. Not to say we should take off the table in years going forward some way to get that dredging taken care of and other things. But the input that I would provide is I think the city's on the right track to go with what's basically the general benefit parcel tax concept, or to explore that further. I also think the lower dollar rate is a must. Even at that lower, I mean, basically the acceptance, the yes rates are painfully low given the current climate. So I think there's a high risk that it's going to fail no matter what. But I think that's something that we should take on to the next step, which is the council. Lastly, for staff, Azalea, I recognize totally that our city is somewhat unique, but Foster City should play a big role. We've had back and forth with them over flood control issues and a whole bunch of related issues. To the extent there's an ability to get them to coordinate at all, I'm not saying it would be easy. I know those council people. Let's just leave it at that. But it would be something that actually folks at our council through staff should maybe try and explore and see if there's a way to get them to pick up a little more of the slack. That's my input. And thank you all very much, Jerry, Azalea, Sarah. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Commissioner Robbins. Who would like to go next with final comments from the commission? Thank you, Commissioner Reyes.
I'll just say that I think staff's proposal has been very thoughtful and certainly seems the appropriate version to take, the approach to take, meaning the stormwater assessment and the lower fee, even though it may not produce the funds at the level that we would aspire to. It just seems the more prudent approach here. That's all.
Thank you. Vice Chair Narita, thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for the presentation and answering all of our questions, Jerry, Sarah, and Azalea. So just a point of feedback on the report did not explain as good as the presentation, and so just wanted to flag like I would love it if the reports in the future maybe provided a click deeper of detail, because I thought it was really rich in the presentation and very helpful to assuage maybe some concerns when these reports are seen by the public, right? And so I think that could be useful. I'm comfortable moving forward with the recommendation on the stormwater, moving forward with the stormwater and not the specific Marina Lagoon assessment, given the level of effort for the amount of money, and also hearing the public comments there. I have a background in passing a lot of city level policies and ballot initiatives, so I'm not deterred by the percents that you have right now. They don't feel very scary to me, real talk. Like, we've done surveys in other cities for infrastructure and transit and all these other things that had much lower starting percents in support and still won. So I'm not as deterred. You have a fixed 41% that are kind of Scrooge McDucks who don't want to provide any kind of fee. That's kind of, okay. And then you have your 59% to work with other than that. And the durability and the consistency of that 59% that is movable to yes, that's very telling, because it's not the price point to me that's the issue. It's how much you know about whether or not you value stormwater, and that's an education thing and a lack of understanding thing rather than a willingness to pay thing. So I'm personally comfortable moving forward on the 120, but if I can also move forward and support the 100, even though I feel politically, one of the concerns I would have is that there is no data where you have all this data on 120. So it can cut both ways. And I feel like those are the things that council will have to weigh in their study session, is like, do you want to go with the data you have, or do you want to take a gamble and make some extrapolations based upon the data you have when you have no data on the next price point? And that's a council decision. But for me, it's just real talk when looking across the nation. Like this, the data's not terrible. And I take heart some of the public comments around people out there in the community who do fundraise and do this work and could potentially be valuable, very valuable partners to the city on that front. So very specifically on some of the framing and messaging that I was kind of getting at in my questioning, I hope there's an opportunity to come back to the Sustainability Commission to test messaging and provide feedback on messaging as things proceed. As I think the commission could have some valuable input there. Just to summarize my top lines, given my advocacy, education, and outreach background across in my career in this space, we always want to center things on the people and why this matters to the people. The fact sheet that was sent out with the survey centered the city. The city needs this much money. The city is the city, and it didn't center the people. And if you talk about what people need to feel safe. People need to make sure their money is used effectively by the city. People need to feel that the city has a plan to address climate change. People need to feel that, when it rains, that it'll be okay, and that the frequency of the rains that we're having, the city's got a plan for it. So those are the things to me that I think when we center people, the messaging changes. And so I would recommend some consideration in the study session or in other times of maybe securing like a comms, a little bit of comms firm, to help out with that messaging, and so maybe or center or taking some input from maybe community members or whatnot about how to reframe things, because this is not a ding on the City of San Mateo staff. This is a systemic issue across city staff. You'll hear me say this many times in different commission meetings, but the city staff are not necessarily trained to talk about non-city city needs, right? Because that's your job and your career. But when dealing with things like this, we really need to think about centering the voters and centering the people and centering the families that are would benefit from this kind of an investment in our future, in our collective future. So I hope there's an opportunity, for additional feedback in the future as materials are developed or whatnot, and the plan moves forward. At this point, though, I think that's all my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Rowinski, please go ahead. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. My comments are to proceed forward with the property fee mechanism, or as we've talked about, the general benefit property tax. So that would be the model I would pursue. However, I will share with you, I thought your 15.5% response rate was actually pretty good for no education. I mean, you went out cold and you got back, actually, I thought some pretty good results personally. And so I'm going to focus, my next two comments are going to be really focused on outreach. And I think this is quite doable, by the way, just based on going out cold, 15.5%. And the roughly, you're at 50%, even at 120 per year. But I want to dovetail off what Commissioner Rita said and focus on the people versus the city. I would agree with that, but I would take that one step further. It's focus on the property owners. Really, that is your audience. End of story. It is the property owner who will vote on this ballot should it move forward. And actually, the city knows who they are. You could do some very, very targeted marketing to every property owner in this city about this effort. And there's a lot of very good, I think once there's, if we talk about safety, we talk about the environmental concerns, climate change, all the feedback that you got, and possibly I'll throw this in, enhancing the lagoon for use by the public by possibly extending the walkways. But that's something people can resonate with. So I think if you know who the property's owner, the city knows who those property owners are. It is a very discrete population who will be voting. I think you've got some good messaging on your plate. So, and finally, I would also consider, I think one of the best outreach efforts I've ever seen done by this city has been done under the general plan. And Sarah, I would talk to Christina, the director of community development, and find out who ran those efforts, because they did pop-ups. You know, where did the property owners go? Farmers markets, downtown. You know, so they did a whole host. They did mailers. They did a great email campaign where they would let the people know of upcoming meetings. They did surveys. So they were by far the most sophisticated I have ever seen this city do on outreach. And you take that, you know who your population is, it's property owners, and you know who they are in the city. The city's got a record of every property owner. So that's my take. Thank you.
Thank you. I will just mention that I think I am in general alignment with my fellow commissioners in support for the recommendations brought forth today. I think there's merit in going ahead. I do think even pursuing a lower amount, such as 96 a year, is better than nothing and would help us address some of our salient issues. I think the lagoon does need to be a part of that. So I appreciate approaching this in a citywide way. There is a clear need for action on the lagoon sooner rather than later, as well as a better long-term plan than hope someone eventually comes up with a long-term plan. So I think I am comfortable with moving ahead in the proposed direction. As was mentioned in this discussion, costs will increase if we do nothing. So, you know, in absence of a stronger alternative, I believe it makes sense to go ahead. I'm disappointed that the lagoon didn't score higher in people's interest, because I agree with other commissioners and public comments that it's a great place, and that there is some clear visual need to address some issues, and that we could end up, you know, I think I still have hope that should we succeed in this and get some funding to kickstart a lagoon dredging, we'll have a tangible benefit that everyone will be able to see and hopefully enjoy. And we may hopefully be able to leverage that should we end up needing to come back to residents some years down the road and ask for more funding to bridge the gap that we've been discussing. So I think in general, those are my comments. I also appreciated some of the talk that Vice Chair Narita brought. I mean, I generally agree with everything Vice Chair Narita says most of the time, and certainly in this case. But additionally, the note about safety when talking about potential outreach topics resonated with me. Perhaps that can play a larger role in messaging. As was mentioned, it's not like it wasn't there, but I think shining a little bit more light on it in the ways described might be useful. So I will leave it there for my comments and thank Jerry Bradshaw and Sarah and of course, Director Mitch for their time and presentation tonight. I'm presuming you have what you feel you need from the commission.
Yes, I think we've got a lot of great comments and something, a pretty good consensus on a lot of the core issues that we have in our recommendation. So with that, I really appreciate it. I don't know if you have anything more you need, Sarah, at this point.
No, I took lots of notes. We got a lot of really good feedback. I appreciate the general support and consensus in our recommendation. We'll do a little bit more work on some options for the numbers and the fee study, but that'll come after we meet with council probably. So we'll look forward to getting going on this.
Yes, and if I will add, thank you very much for the feedback, especially the focus on outreach. Absolutely, Commissioner Narita. We are so focused, right? And we do think about the city, but I think your feedback in terms of shifting this and focusing on people is pretty insightful. So I think we'll definitely regroup and work on our strategy.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you, of course, to the public who joined in and gave their comments on this as well. That would conclude this item, and I will move us on to reports and announcements. I would ask Director Mitch if she has any.
Yes. So this past Monday night, if you were not able to make the council meeting, we did present the work plan for fiscal year 2022-23 for all the council priorities. And also we presented additional resource needs. We have many priorities that were added as part of the Blue Sky session in January. And so we've been working pretty hard trying to assess, and propose work plans that are feasible. So that was published. It was part of a Monday night study session. So I can send you all a link after this meeting. That strategic plan will be adopted at the next meeting, April 4th. So that is the plan, and that's on consent. The other important piece is that on April 4th, the council meeting will be hybrid. So some council members, we don't know how many yet, will be at council chambers in person. We staff, if we are presenting, will be expected to be there in person, and the public will be able to attend as well. We will see how that goes. The expectation for commissions is to sort of try to assess how staff can navigate the virtual space as well as the public space. So we will share with you, we'll address any hiccups, and the plan is to go hybrid for commission meetings as well, but we will start with council meetings. And Cookie and Molly are going through a lot of training because it will be challenging to navigate both spaces. But we will keep you posted on that front. And I will send you all the link to the work plan for the next fiscal year.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any reports and announcements from the commission? Going once. I do not have any this time. I'm going to spare people, but I thank everybody for their time. And if there's nothing else further, then I will consider this meeting adjourned. And thank everyone, and good night.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Record.